The council chamber had never been so tense, though it was supposed to be the most orderly hall in the galaxy. Holographic banners of dozens of species flickered overhead, casting colored light across polished stone. Representatives filled tiered rows, their voices hushed, their movements restless. The agenda for the day was simple on paper: a vote to limit Earth's military expansion and impose stricter oversight on their colonies. Many thought it would be routine. Humanity had always been firm, sometimes blunt, but they played within the rules. Everyone assumed they would protest, argue, and finally yield like so many others before them. What happened instead sent a chill across the chamber. When the measure was announced, the human delegation didn't request time to speak. They didn't demand amendments. They rose from their seats, 3 ambassadors and 2 aides dressed in simple dark suits, and began walking toward the exit. Their departure was silent, deliberate, and unhurried. The sound of footsteps echoed louder than any speech could have. Conversations died mid-sentence. One by one, the aliens realized what they were watching: not negotiation, not diplomacy, but rejection. Humanity was leaving the room, and no one knew if they meant the chamber, the council, or the galaxy itself. A ripple of unease spread through the crowd. Representatives who prided themselves on predicting outcomes fumbled for explanations. The insected delegates clicked nervously, exchanging rapid signals of alarm. The aquatic envoys shifted in their nutrient tanks, bubbles betraying agitation. Even the stoic reptilian strategists narrowed their eyes, their tongues flicking in uncertainty. Humans had never done this before. They had argued fiercely, sometimes walked the edge of threats, but always within the forum's walls. To stand up and abandon the discussion entirely was something else. It was a declaration no one could quite name, and that made it worse. Whispers became frantic exchanges. Do they mean to withdraw entirely? Are they severing ties? Do they prepare for war? The chamber swelled with speculation, but no answer came. The human seats remained empty, cold in the flood of light, their insignia dimmed. A silence heavier than any gavel weighed on the council. No other species had the reputation for decisive action that humanity carried. When others bluffed, everyone knew. When humans moved, they moved with purpose. And now, they had chosen not to speak but to walk away. The presiding chair tried to restore order, voice trembling as it reverberated across the chamber. It failed. Representatives leaned toward their aides, exchanging panicked calculations. Military analysts already drafted contingency notes. Traders calculated how many of their goods relied on human shipping. Medical envoys considered the loss of Earth-developed cures. Even those who despised humanity's blunt ways could not ignore the reality. Humanity's absence would leave a vacuum, and nature abhorred vacuums. The more the silence lingered, the sharper the fear became. The council chamber had weathered centuries of debates, from border disputes to resource wars, but rarely had its members faced uncertainty so total. This wasn't about a threat delivered or a weapon brandished. It was about the unknown. Humans had chosen to withhold explanation. Every alien mind filled the void with its own nightmare scenario. Some imagined fleets mobilizing beyond the rim. Others pictured embargoes or withheld technologies. Still others feared the simplest possibility, that humans no longer needed them at all. The sudden imbalance was undeniable. Humanity's presence in the council had never been comfortable, too assertive, too independent, but it had become a cornerstone of stability. Their trade kept half the spiral arms supplied, their patrols suppressed piracy, their medicines saved lives across species. Their ships had intervened in conflicts no one else dared to resolve. Now the thought hung over the chamber. If they truly meant to walk away, what would follow? The first to break the silence was a herbivore delegate, voice quavering as it called for calm. But the words rang hollow, because calm required certainty, and certainty had vanished the moment the humans stood. Even as the chamber tried to resume its protocols, everyone knew the truth. The council had passed many laws, wielded much authority, but in that instant it was exposed as fragile. One species had demonstrated how easily the weight of tradition could be shrugged aside. The vote was postponed, but that decision meant little. The real decision had already been made, not by the chamber, but by the empty seats. The humans had left without protest, without drama, and that made the gesture thunder louder than any accusation. Delegates shuffled uneasily, exchanging glances that mixed anger with fear. For all their advanced civilizations, none could escape the thought repeating in their minds: predators don't leave unless they're hunting elsewhere, and humans had just left the room. Panic spread through the chamber long after the humans' departure. The emptiness of their seats gnawed at every delegate, a reminder that the balance had shifted in an instant. Discussions that had once been orderly spiraled into frantic debate. One faction demanded swift punishment to prove the council's authority. Another warned that retaliation would only invite destruction. No consensus formed, only louder arguments and sharper divisions. Every word spoken carried the weight of fear. The reptilian strategists were the first to voice the unspoken truth: predators never abandon a hunt unless they see a greater opportunity. To them, the walkout was not a retreat but a maneuver, a sign that humans were preparing for something larger. Their analysis was dismissed by some but remembered by all. The insected envoys, known for their rigid hive logic, declared that humanity's departure was a calculated tactic to unsettle the council, and it was working flawlessly. Even those who doubted the theory could not ignore the tightening in their own throats. The military implications dominated the whispers. Projections of human fleets filled private displays, angular warships designed with brutal efficiency. No ornament, no excess, only weapons, engines, and armor. Alien admirals remembered encounters with human vessels. They moved like predators, striking quickly, ending battles before they could drag on. To imagine those ships untethered from council oversight was to imagine every border vulnerable. Pirates and rival powers would hesitate only until they saw humanity's stance. Once it was clear Earth no longer played by council rules, chaos would follow. Economists sounded alarms as well. Trade routes depended on human carriers, their freighters known for speed and reliability. Medical delegates whispered about the treatments Earth had developed, cures that sustained millions across dozens of systems. A simple withdrawal of cooperation could unravel entire economies, topple weaker governments, and cripple planets reliant on steady supply lines. No speeches were necessary. Every delegate could already see the cracks spreading outward from the empty chairs. Rumors accelerated the panic. Reports surfaced of human colonies reinforcing defenses. Merchant captains claimed that human shipyards were working day and night, accelerating construction. Whether true or exaggerated, each story added to the council's unease. Silence from Earth only deepened the uncertainty. Had the humans already severed ties? Were they gathering strength for a confrontation? Or had they decided the Galxy offered nothing worth negotiating for? No answer came, and the absence of information became its own kind of weapon. Alliances began to fray. Species that once trusted each other now eyed one another with suspicion, wondering who had pushed hardest for the decree that triggered humanity's walkout. Old rivalries resurfaced inside conversations, accusations slipped into speeches, and every representative measured words more carefully, knowing they might be judged as friend or foe in whatever came next. The unity the council had prided itself on began to look brittle, more performance than substance. Behind closed doors, contingency plans took shape. Some factions urged building defenses near human borders, though none believed they would be enough. Others suggested appeasement, drafting proposals to roll back restrictions and lure humanity back into the fold. A smaller, more radical group whispered that it might be better to strike first, while humanity's intentions were still unclear. The very thought sent shudders through those who remembered human history, their relentless resilience, their ability to adapt and counter any strategy. Few wanted to imagine what would happen if war truly came. The presiding councilors tried to restore order with speeches about diplomacy and patience. The words sounded empty. Everyone in the chamber understood that humanity's silence was more dangerous than threats. Aliens were accustomed to rhetoric, to endless debates, to conflicts waged in words long before weapons were drawn. Humans had skipped every step, answering the decree not with argument but with absence. That absence now dictated the rhythm of the Galxy. By the end of the session, no resolution had been reached. The vote was suspended, but the damage was done. Each faction left the chamber calculating risks, recalling the sight of the humans' deliberate walkout. The council had always believed itself the center of stability, but the truth had become impossible to ignore. The humans had demonstrated in a single gesture that stability had depended on them far more than anyone had admitted. And as the delegates dispersed, one thought echoed silently among them all: the galaxy could no longer predict what humanity would do, and that uncertainty was already more terrifying than open war. The shock of the humans' departure did not stay confined to the chamber. Within days, ripples spread across the galaxy, disrupting every corner of the Council's vast network. Markets that had once relied on steady human trade faltered. Entire sectors watched supply chains collapse as human freighters stopped appearing at expected ports. Minerals, medical shipments, and advanced technologies once distributed freely under Earth's agreements grew scarce. Prices soared. Civilian populations, unaware of the political maneuvers, demanded answers their governments could not provide. A murmur of unrest swelled into something louder, feeding instability on dozens of worlds. Without the steadying presence of human patrols, piracy surged. Smuggling rings moved quickly to exploit the vacuum, armed with salvaged or black market human weapons. Merchant guilds reported escalating raids, while border colonies pleaded for help. The Council attempted to coordinate defense, but responses proved slow, fragmented, and ineffective. For years, humans had taken responsibility for rapid intervention, deploying ships to trouble zones before conflicts could escalate. Their absence revealed how dependent the galaxy had become on their willingness to enforce peace. Inside the Council itself, paranoia reached a breaking point. Each delegation began to suspect the other of orchestrating the crisis. Accusations of manipulation and betrayal became common. The decree that triggered the walkout was dissected word by word, every phrase blamed on one rival faction or another. Former allies turned cold, diplomatic courtesies replaced by veiled hostility. The chamber, once a place of forced unity, became a battlefield of suspicion. What had begun as an attempt to limit human influence had instead exposed how fragile the Council's cohesion truly was. Attempts to re-establish contact with Earth failed. Secret envoys were dispatched, carrying promises of compromise and offers of reconciliation. They were received politely but firmly dismissed. Communications carried back a consistent message: humanity was no longer interested in negotiating under Council terms. There was no declaration of war, no demand, not even a list of grievances. Just silence beyond the minimum courtesy of acknowledgement. The lack of hostility unsettled the Council even more. If humans had spoken in anger, at least their intentions could have been measured. Instead, their quiet indifference left every possibility open. Rumors filled the void. Some claimed human colonies were stockpiling weapons, that shipyards glowed night and day with accelerated production. Others whispered of new technologies being tested in secret, weapons that might tip any conflict beyond recovery. Even if only half the stories were true, the implications terrified Council members. For all their advancements, most species understood they had never matched humanity's pace of innovation, nor their relentless ability to adapt in crises. Silence allowed the imagination to supply the worst conclusions. Galactic stability began to fracture. Border skirmishes erupted where rival species once restrained themselves for fear of human intervention. Old conflicts, dormant for generations, reignited with sudden ferocity. Each clash fueled more mistrust, and without humanity's steadying hand, treaties collapsed almost overnight. The Council called emergency sessions, but agreements dissolved before ink could dry. Where once the chamber had presented itself as the apex of interstellar order, it now resembled a collapsing edifice held together by fear and pretense. The sense of dread deepened as smaller civilizations, once confident under the Council's umbrella, realized their vulnerability. They had relied on human protection in unspoken ways, trading stability for trust. Now, left exposed, they scrambled to forge new pacts, often siding with larger empires that promised safety. The galaxy began to polarize, blocs forming with suspicion at their core. Each alliance carried the undertone of desperation, the understanding that without humanity, no agreement could hold for long. Through it all, the most haunting detail remained humanity's silence. They issued no threats, broadcast no ultimatums, gave no indication of what they intended next. It was as though they had simply withdrawn their hand and left the galaxy to its own devices. In that void, the Council saw its reflection clearly, fractured, dependent, incapable of acting without the very species it had sought to restrain. And the question no one dared voice in public became the private terror of every delegate. What if humans had decided the galaxy's grand assembly was irrelevant, and that their future lay on paths no one else could follow? Borders that had once been stable began to fracture as the absence of human oversight emboldened rivals. Small disputes, long held in check by the knowledge that Earth would intervene, now erupted into open clashes. Fleets maneuvered aggressively near contested systems, testing the patience of neighbors who had once feared swift human retaliation. Reports of destroyed colonies and seized stations flooded into the council chambers faster than responses could be organized. Every incident underscored the same truth: without humanity, the galaxy's fragile order was crumbling. Pirates thrived in the chaos. Their ships, many equipped with scavenged human-designed weapons, carved through weaker patrols. Entire trade routes became impassable as raiders grew bolder, striking not only fringe worlds but also well-defended hubs. Merchant guilds, unable to secure safe passage, suspended operations. Economic collapse accelerated, spreading panic through civilian populations. Protests broke out on countless worlds as citizens demanded protection their governments could no longer guarantee. The Council's attempts to mobilize defenses proved slow and fragmented, hampered by mistrust between species. Every race suspected the other of withholding forces for its own advantage, leaving gaps that opportunists quickly exploited. The chamber itself became a theater of desperation. Sessions stretched for days, delegates shouting over one another with accusations and threats. No one trusted anyone else, and every proposal was undermined by suspicion of ulterior motives. Old grudges resurfaced, shaping alliances along ancient fault lines. Species that had barely tolerated each other under the umbrella of stability now eyed one another as rivals for dominance in the new order. The vision of unity, long celebrated as the Council's crowning achievement, was dissolving in plain view. Behind the noise, secret calculations unfolded. Some factions prepared contingency plans to seize human trade routes the moment they seemed abandoned. Others considered striking preemptively at colonies near their borders, fearing those settlements might become fortified outposts in future wars. None admitted it openly, but all understood the same grim reality. No power wanted humanity as an enemy, yet no one could afford to ignore the vacuum they had left behind. Fear of what Earth might do clashed with fear of what others might seize first. Meanwhile, whispers circulated that human worlds had grown quieter, not more aggressive. Intelligence reports suggested an eerie calm, colonies focused inward, shipyards busy but not mobilized for open war, fleets visible yet inactive. To some, this calm was the most unsettling sign of all. It suggested confidence, the kind that came not from desperation but from preparation. Predators at rest were more frightening than predators lunging, because no one could guess when they would decide to move. For ordinary citizens across the galaxy, hope in the Council began to evaporate. News of bickering leaders spread faster than their resolutions. Once, the Council had seemed like the ultimate safeguard against chaos. Now it appeared weak, paralyzed, unable to act decisively. On world after world, populations wondered aloud whether humanity had been the true stabilizing force all along. Politicians who once mocked Earth now faced the uncomfortable reality that their prosperity had rested on the very species they sought to control. The chamber grew quieter as this realization settled in. Delegates who had shouted for sanctions now hesitated, their voices faltering under the weight of uncertainty. Few admitted it openly, but the fear was universal. Perhaps the humans had not left in anger at all. Perhaps they had simply chosen to stop carrying a burden no one else had been willing to shoulder. That possibility was more dangerous than threats of war, because it implied the Council had been nothing more than a stage, its power sustained by a species that never truly needed it. And as crises multiplied unchecked, the silence from Earth loomed larger, heavier, more decisive than any fleet. The galaxy's leaders could not escape the sense that their fate no longer lay in their own hands. It rested with those who had walked away without a word, leaving everyone else to wonder whether the predators would return, or whether they had already decided the council was no longer worth their time. The council's grand chamber had become a hollow echo of its former self. Delegates still gathered, but their voices carried less conviction. Every session opened with attempts at unity and collapsed into accusations. Borders burned, economies faltered, and trust dissolved. In desperation, a final delegation was dispatched to Earth. This time, they arrived not with demands but with pleas. Entire empires depended on an answer. The envoys were received, though not lavishly. Humanity offered no displays of power, no fleets arranged as intimidation. They welcomed the visitors with calm, courteous detachment. Questions tumbled from the alien representatives. Would Earth return to the Council? Would they enforce the peace they once safeguarded? Would they rescue the galaxy from the chaos left behind? Each plea was met with silence until one human finally spoke. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a verdict. Humanity had not left in anger, nor in weakness. They had walked out because they no longer accepted being treated as subordinates in a council that relied on them while diminishing their voice. The envoys tried to argue, insisting that without Earth the spiral arms would collapse into endless war. The humans listened but did not waver. They reminded the delegates of what had already happened in the council's absence. Trade seized by pirates, treaties shredded, allies turning on each other. None of it had been caused by Earth. It had been caused by those who assumed humanity could be restrained without consequence. The galaxy had revealed its dependence in the clearest way possible, through panic the moment humanity stepped aside. The delegation pressed further, offering concessions, rescinding decrees, even promising greater authority for human representatives. But the humans refused to be enticed. Their tone was calm, measured, but unyielding. They explained that respect once lost could not be bought back with hurried bargains. The Council had shown its true view of Earth, and humanity had chosen to stop carrying the burden of holding an empire-spanning alliance together. They had not threatened war because they did not need to. The galaxy had undone itself. The realization spread like fire among the endless. Humanity was not negotiating for advantage. They were declaring independence from a system that had proven hollow. They had no interest in destroying the Council, but neither did they intend to prop it up again. Their fleets would defend their own worlds, their trade would serve those they chose, and their science would benefit partners who dealt in respect, not condescension. The message was unmistakable. The galaxy no longer dictated terms to Earth. When the delegation returned with this answer, the chamber fell into stunned silence. The emptiness of the human seats now seemed final, not temporary. No vote could change what had been decided. The Council could draft decrees, but without humanity's enforcement they meant nothing. The members understood, each in their own way, that the order they had relied on was gone. Some raged, some despaired, some simply sat in quiet acceptance. Across the stars, that silence became its own kind of power. Worlds remembered who had kept the trade lanes open, who had suppressed piracy, who had stood firm when predators tested borders. It had not been the chamber. It had been humanity. And now humanity had walked away without firing a shot, without raising their voices, simply demonstrating that they had been the true foundation all along. In the end, the panic that swept the Council was not born from the fear of invasion but from recognition. They realized too late that the humans had never needed them. It had always been the other way around. And as the chamber sat in uneasy quiet, each delegate carried the same chilling thought: predators do not return to cages they have broken open. Humanity had left, and the galaxy would never be the same again.